I'm going to be honest right up front. The War of the Rohirrim is a good movie. Everyone who's out there saying that it's boring, that it's poorly written, that it's plagued by Mary Sue characters and unearned girl bosses, I just have to ask, did we watch the same movie? I mean it, honestly. This was a good film, and I feel like people want it to fail. So, well, let's talk about that. Hi there, everyone. Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and let me just give my credentials right off the bat. I've been making videos about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and all of the extended universe of Middle-earth and its great fantastic lore for years now. And I'm someone who has torn into the Rings of Power even more so than other bigger channels like Nerdrotic or Critical Drinker or Shadiversity. Yes, I have. They may be bigger, but I have definitely gone further in depth than any of them. And I've been able to show where certain stories have done really well. I've been able to show the brilliance of Tolkien and show the absolute abject failure of the Rings of Power. So when I come around and say that the War of the Rohirrim is genuinely good, it's not because I'm some Warner Brothers shill or because I'm getting copious amounts of money from some backdoor person over here. No, I am definitely not. As a person on a small channel and as a novice author, I went to go see this movie in the hopes of enjoying it and preparing myself for the absolute worst. And in fact, actually, that preparation, that fear that it was going to be awful, kind of ruined my watching experience for about 30 minutes until I realized, wait a second. This is actually good. I settled in and enjoyed the movie, and I got to go back and watch it again without these fears because it is a great film. Is it on the same level as Peter Jackson's amazing Lord of the Rings trilogy? No. Is it the wonders that Tolkien wrote? No. Is it fan fiction? Yes. And yet, it is written well. And dare I say that this movie as a whole might actually be the best thing that we've gotten in terms of any Lord of the Rings adaptation, aside from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy? I might just dare to say that. I do like a lot of the things in the Hobbit trilogy, but let's be fair, the Hobbit trilogy is overstretched. There's a lot of things that were crammed in that didn't need to be crammed in, and it was way too heavy on the CGI. For War of the Rohirrim, it's a solid story. Yes, it's fanfiction because it focuses on Hera, the unnamed daughter of Helm Hammerhand, rather than focusing on Helm Hammerhand or also focusing on Freylof, his nephew, who should have been an equal main character in this movie. I'll just say that up front. However, that does not remove the fact that this is a well-written, well-executed story that is respectful to a lot of the lore that Tolkien established. So, I'm going to split up this video into my review of the movie, then breaking down what was good, and then also breaking down what was bad, because there were some things that were not really strong within the writing, and a couple of things that were just flat out not good at all. But even with that being said, it did not take away from my experience as a viewer or as an author. In fact, Helm's Last Stand is incredibly beautiful and emotional, and you know what? Part of the reason why it's so great is because it is a man who rises above his own grief to protect his daughter. And you wouldn't get that without having Hera as a great character within the story. So let's start diving into this. The War of the Rohirrim draws largely from the works of Tolkien in Appendix A at the end of The Return of the King. There he focuses on the story of Helm Hammerhand and how the first line of Errol actually came to its end. The entire family gets wiped out in the long winter during a great war between Rohan and defectors from Rohan, as well as allies of Dunland, and specifically Dunland itself, who are not really well represented within the Peter Jackson movies. Makes sense because there's already so much going on in those movies that the Dunlandings, who really only play kind of a peripheral role, really aren't very necessary in building up that movie. In any case, the Dunlandings actually come front and center in the story, working alongside mercenaries from Harad and from the Southrons in order to overwhelm Rohan. And it is at a very specific time. the movie does kind of flirt a little bit with some of the stuff that's happening, in where Gondor is actually under siege at that moment from the Corsairs of Umbar, working together with some of their other allies, and it's the perfect time for Wolf to strike against Rohan, while Gondor is distracted and unable to come to Rohan's aid. Now, that's kind of the background information, but at the heart of this story is Hera, who is the wild child princess of Helm Hammerhand. She is the third child. She's not really all that important within the politics of the court of Rohan, and so as a result, she's just kind of been living her own best adventurous life, seen as the wild child. No one really knows what to make of her because she's not a proper lady. Kind of think Merida from the movie Brave, but with maybe actually a little bit more character to her. In any case, Hera is just, she's the kind of the third princess. She is absolutely the spare of the spare. And she's okay with that until she gets involved in the politics of kingdoms, where she finds out that not only is she supposed to be married off to some lord of Gondor, most likely the son of the steward, but also now Freka, the wayward lord of the West March, has come on in and now wants her to marry his son Wolf, who was her childhood friend. Well, she doesn't really want to have any of this. She wants to be wild and free, and that whole life comes crashing down. Helm Hammerhand's like, no, daughter, you're going to know your place, and Freka, you're going to know your place. Wolf, you're going to know your place, and you get this awesome brawl outside of Medelsed, which is the castle, so to say. It is the great hall of Edoras. Helm takes Freka on outside to talk like men, because it's not right for the king to brawl within his own house, and he kills Freka with one punch. Wolf, of course, reacts very negatively to his father being killed right in front of him, tries to attack the king nearly kills him, but decides, no, mercy, but not the best kind of mercy. You are exiled. You are no longer a lord of Rohan. You and your whole household are now banished. Wolf goes and joins the Dunlingdons and raises an army to come against Rohan at the most inopportune time. Now that Helm knows that his daughter is a target of Freka and his family, Hera loses all of her freedom by now having her cousin Freylof, as well as a bunch of courtiers, following her around to make sure that she doesn't get into any trouble. But trouble comes for Rohan, as a diseased Mumakil, one of the Oliphants, comes rampaging on through the area, a signal that things are not all quite right within Rohan. Hera has a cool moment where she's able to lead the Mumakil away into the dangerous upper swamp regions where the Watcher in the Water is supposedly to have originated from. I think that this is an interesting little detail to have right here. I more like the idea that Sauron kind of helped to put the Watcher in the Water where he's supposed to be, but according to the more extended lore of Middle-earth, the Watcher in the Water came from one of the diseased, swampy areas down from out of the mountains, which, if he followed the river from Rohan, makes sense that he would have eventually ended up just outside of Moria. But in any case, here's the Watcher in the Water. Hera manages to get the diseased Mumakil killed in a very intense, pretty great scene. For anyone who's seen Princess Mononoke, you've got that same kind of gorgeousness happening here in this moment. But she's caught unawares. She's taken prisoner to Isengard, where Wolf has set up shop. This is before Saruman is on the scene, because Saruman will eventually be given Isengard as a gift for his help for the kingdoms of men, but also to ensure that Isengard can never be used again as a stronghold by the Dunlingdons to attack Rohan, thereby securing Rohan's flank and making the kingdom a lot stronger and more prosperous. But that's something that happens at the end of this movie. So Hera is taken captive. Freylof then goes to rescue her, but her attendant, Elowyn, who is one of the last members of the original Shield Maidens of Rohan, or not necessarily of the original Shield Maidens, but of that order, the Order of the Shield Maidens, goes on in to help rescue her after she discovers that Wolf has this grand plan to overthrow the kingdom. And one of the things I should already say right here is that it's very obvious by this point that Hera's not a Mary Sue. The world does not bend to her liking. We actually see her in this moment having to sacrifice. She is even willing to marry Wolf in order to save her people. That is something that a Mary Sue wouldn't have to do, because Mary Sue would be able to just break the rules and make the world and the plot bend for her. No, in fact, she's been defeated by regular guys at this point. She hasn't been going around swinging her sword, killing a bunch of people. She couldn't take the Oliphant down by herself. She had to use trickery in order to make that happen, along with all of her skill on horseback. And she can't escape on her own. Wolf very clearly puts her in her place until she is rescued. This right here is good. For anyone's like, she's a Mary Sue, she's a girl boss. This sequence of events disproves that. She is a very capable adventurer, but a great warrior she is not yet. And that is something to note here, that Hera grows to become the warrior and heroine that the story needs her to be by the end. This is the beginning of her adventure. Her cousin and the others manage to rescue her. They rush off to Aedoros, inform the king of what's happening, and Helm decides he's going to charge the Dunlingdons head on. He knows how to overtake them, and they don't have enough cavalry to match him. They might have the Oliphants, but the Riders of Rohan know how to deal with these Oliphants. If we can split them apart, isolate them, they become easier to break down and kill. So the king is confident that he can win, but he's then betrayed by one of his lords, and one of his flanks is left open, allowing for Wolf to swing on around and attack Aedoros and sack it. It's thanks to Hera that she's able to evacuate the people of Aedoros and get them leaving for the Hornburg. And there's where she actually gets her first kill. One of the treacherous lords of Rohan corners her in the stables and attempts to murder her. Or maybe do something else. I mean, it's kind of a little bit suggestive what's happening in that scene. In any case, she gets her first kill, but it's not like Guy Ladriel swinging her sword around and easily taking off his head. No, again, she gets manhandled. And it's more of an accident that her horse manages to rear up and kick the guy in the back right as she's pulling up a pitchfork to defend herself, since her sword got slapped away, and she manages to impale the guy. Then, at that point, Aedoros is attacked, it is sacked. Her brother, Haleth, has a really awesome moment of taking down an entire Mumakil and its party by himself. This guy is awesome, and it's clear that he's one of the greatest warriors in Rohan, but at his greatest moment of triumph, after having saved the home of the king himself, he then gets an arrow through the throat by Wolf. And now Hera's in the open, her brother Hama's in the open, Helm, who has been injured, is now also in the open and are ripe for the picking, and Hera has to effectively leave her younger brother behind, who decides that he will have one final stand against Wolf in order to allow his sister and his father to escape. It is a very emotional moment that ends with all of her brothers getting killed and she herself being holed up in the Hornburg with her father, who's been wounded and falls into depression. However, at the moment where everything seems darkest, as the Dunlingdons have not only taken Edoros and scattered the armies of Rohan, and they have now besieged the Hornburg, and the people of the defenders have barely any supplies left, this is the moment where the king snaps and becomes the great wraith Helm Hammerhand, and goes out during the night, blowing his horn, stalking through the cold and the snow, and murdering men with his bare hands. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Now, granted, this is one thing where I have to say this could have been done a little bit better if we had seen him already murdering men with his bare hands much earlier. When we finally get the full scene of him just killing men left and right with his bare hands, it is incredible. It is so dang good. And I would have loved to have seen more of that. But maybe in this case, less is more. But Hera, who is concerned for her people, doing her best to rally them, to encourage them to stand fast. When she realizes that her father's gone missing, she goes looking for her father, ends up outside where orcs are ransacking the corpses and eating them, which I really like this little detail, because the Dunlingdons claimed in the lore that Helm Hammerhand ate the dead. Now then, there's really nothing else beyond that Tolkien wrote, and what I like here is that the writers decided to give some credibility, quote unquote, to that claim by having the corpses being ransacked and eaten. Not by Helm, but by orcs. Orcs sent from Mordor to search among the great warriors, because Sauron is looking to see if anyone has one of the rings of power and is thereby wielding great strength. And this is actually something directly out of the lore, not necessarily for the War of the Rohirrim itself, but this is a tactic that Sauron uses. Generate great conflict, see who the warriors are, investigate those warriors, and see if any of them have a ring of power, and if so, kill that person and take the ring. This is how Sauron has been trying to accumulate the rings after his downfall. So even though this seems like a scene that really shouldn't be in the movie, it works lore-wise. It's really, really good. And Helm then realizes that his daughter's out in the open. She's being attacked by orcs. He rescues her by helping to kill 2 orcs and take on a snow troll or a hill troll single-handedly. Hera comes on in, helps him out when the troll matches him strength for strength and puts a spear into the troll's eye, allowing Helm to then finally finish off the troll. It is a great scene. Then the two of them rush to the gates of the Hornburg, and their Helm buys time for his daughter for them to close the gates by taking on the army of the Dunlingdons single-handedly, head-to-head, and wins. He dies in the cold and the snow, just like the lore says, remaining unbent, unbroken, defiant, with the dead strewn before him upon the dike. Oh, it's so good. And then it's matched with the amazing music for the Fallen King that you get from the extended version of The Two Towers. It's just chef's kiss. But now Wolf has the family defeated and broken. Hera is the last person, and he wishes to destroy her. And as this movie goes on, you see how revenge slowly eats at him, turning him mad, turning a person who should have been a great Lord of Rohan, and turning him instead into this craven king. It's really good character development, and it makes good logical sense as the story continues on. And Wolf's like, fine, I'm just going to obliterate the Hornburg, as they start creating this massive siege tower. And that's going to be part of the bad that I'm going to get to. I'm going to address that. And Hera is completely blocked in. What she does then is she then reaches for one of the great eagle's nests in order to communicate with one of the eagles and beg them to please take her father's armor to Freylof, who is in Dunharrow, and beg for him to bring his army in to help alleviate the siege, which is ultimately what happens. But in order for this to all play out the way that it needs to, she needs to make sure that Wolf has no idea what's coming, or how she's going to rescue her people by getting them to escape through the hidden passageway in the mountains. And so using the leftover moth-eaten wedding dress of a woman who died of fever right before her wedding night and has kind of become a token of ill omen within the Hornburg, she dresses herself up as a bride, approaches Wolf for a single combat, claiming that she is wedded to death alone, faces off against Wolf, and manages to finally kill him as her cousin rushes on in, like Gandalf, like Éomer from the movies, and brushes the army of the Dunlingdons aside, and the day is won. Rohan will be rebuilt, and Hera rides off to vanish into song to find out what her destiny is meant to be. There you go. That's the movie. And it's good. It really is good. Yes, again, I acknowledge that a lot of it is fan fiction, but it's actually good fan fiction. So let me address the matter of Mary Sues and girl bosses right off the bat. In order for a character to be a Mary Sue, they have to be skilled and amazing and perfect at everything. Everyone loves them, and the story literally bends itself into knots in order to make sure that the Mary Sue or Gary Stu gets whatever he or she wants, even if it goes against all logic, and all of their mistakes are actually right. No, it was always the right thing to do, and they are absolutely unassailable characters who can do no wrong. And effectively, because of this, they have no character arc. Hera has a character arc. Her character arc is probably a lot more subtle along the lines of what Arwen's is, what was given to her within the movies, because in the books, Arwen isn't really a major player at all. She is very much a side character. Peter Jackson decided to bring her to the forefront in order to help elevate the love story between her and Aragorn, and to do that, Arwen had to be given a subtle character arc of showing her great faith in the one that she loves and that good will triumph over evil. With Hera, it's kind of along those same lines. It's not like she has to gain some great knowledge or some great power to prove to herself that she is an amazing heroine, but rather she has to prove her own strength and her great independence. That is her story. And so in this case, yeah, she actually is a girl boss. And girl bosses are not inherently a bad thing, only if you execute the trope of girl boss poorly. Hera is not a Mary Sue. She suffers incredible losses. She's not always right. Yes, Helm does say, you could rule the world, but you know what? That's a loving father about to sacrifice himself on a bridge. Of course he's going to say something overly dramatic and loving. It's actually a really great scene. And what we get to see is that, again, Hera is not some big paragon who can defeat absolutely everyone and everything. She has some kills to her name, yes, but those kills actually come more from trickery rather than just pure brawn and strength. And she's always constantly relying on other people. She has to rely on Eowyn. She has to rely on Freylof. She has to rely on the young page Leaf in order to make things happen. She doesn't do it all on her own. She's not a Mary Sue, but she is a girl boss. She is someone who wishes to have something, fights to obtain it. And when she has obtained it, when she's finally obtained that independence and that recognition and love that she's craved for so long from her father and from her people, she then has to defend it against the person who wishes to take it away from her, which in this case is Wolf, which is why she dresses up like a bride in order to fight against him. Not only is it part of her strategy to make sure that he's focused on her solely and completely, but it's also symbolic of how she is her own person. She is wedded to death. She will either kill Wolf and be free, or she will die and be free. One way or the other, she will never lose what she has gained. That is her girl boss moment, and it is well earned, it's well executed. And all you have to do is just pay attention to the story. Another thing is this: Helm Hammerhand is great. He is a great king of Rohan. He is wise, he is powerful, he is headstrong, but just like Theoden, he's not above reproach. He makes mistakes, and those mistakes cost him bitterly, but he rises above it all. His moments of showing great care and love for his sons, for his daughter, for his people is incredible. Yes, he becomes a man possessed with grief and with rage, but we see that humanity come back to him as he makes his great last stand. Helm Hammerhand in this movie is the way that he's depicted in the book, and it is great. Also, the other men in the story are not put down. Wolf is a tragic character, and it's really cool watching him, and it's really sad at the same time, because again, you could see that he has that potential to be a great man, but because of his choices, he becomes this horrible wretch and monster. Then there is Hama, the younger brother to Hera. He is a great supporting character, a much kinder individual who would not be the great prince or the great warrior. That's his brother Haleth, and his brother Haleth is super cool. Haleth does everything you want to have Haleth do, who is just the ultimate warrior, who meets a great heroic end. Hama meets that tragic end where he's like, I wish I could have been a great hero. And in many ways he is, but his heroism comes in sacrifice rather than in surviving to be this great individual. Then you have Freylof, and Freylof, I would argue, should have been an equal main character to Helm and Hera in this movie, because this is also largely his story and how he becomes king of Rohan. But while I would love to have more of him in this movie, what we get of him, he is a competent man, his cousin loves him, never puts him down, and he is the hero as well at the end of the day. And Leaf is really cool as well. He's this little pudgy guy that you don't expect much of. He doesn't feel like he belongs, and yet his loyalty, his love, and his determination and his goodness make him a guy that you just root for. He's an underdog, and he's an underdog who rises to become a very trusted leader and counselor within Rohan. It's great! It's awesome! And of course, the animation is really good. Sure, there's some little janky moments here and there where maybe the CGI and the artistry over it don't quite line up the way that you would hope, but oh my gosh, this is just a feast for the eyes. And the fight scenes are absolutely excellent. And I just gotta say this, drawing horses is difficult, and yet you got all these amazing horses right there on the screen. It's great. It's awesome. And I've seen people say that the dialogue is really weak. The dialogue is not the best that I've ever heard, but it's good. It's competent with some great one-liners. And I will say this, the whole moment where Hera comes out and has her girl boss moment, she's like, I am bonded to death. I cringed at first. I did. And yet, watching that scene and then reflecting on it, I was like, oh no, oh my gosh, no, that was a great line. Holy cow. So if some of the dialogue at first doesn't immediately mesh with you, give it some time to simmer a little bit. Because I was surprised that some of the things that I thought was really bad at first ended up being really good. And I was entertained throughout the whole movie. There are some slower moments, but those slower moments allow us to really enjoy some of the better character moments, as well as build up some of the revelations and some of the themes that will be very important at the end. Because most of the story does come together for that final fight at the siege, or at the battle on the wall, where Hera goes off against Wolf and everything just comes together so beautifully. Largely, this is a great movie. Now, something I'm going to put here at the end because I don't exactly know how I feel about it. It made me really happy, but I'm also conflicted about it. The introduction of Saruman and Gandalf within the story. They did resurrect Christopher Lee's voice to reprise Saruman. I myself am not a fan of resurrecting dead actors. I say let them rest. They deserve their rest. And Christopher Lee does as well. But let's face it, the guy who brought Saruman to life in our day and time was Christopher Lee. And hearing his voice again, even though it's really for just one line, oh my gosh, I was shook. I was like, whoa, I didn't realize just how much I missed you, Christopher, until I got to hear your voice again. And it's in such a great scene, especially if you know the greater lore of Middle-earth. Wow. Oh, it's so good. And then seeing Gandalf's letter to Hera as he's investigating her claims about what the orcs were doing to the dead at Helm's Deep was a great moment. I didn't realize it. I didn't realize I was going to get so emotional over that. And yes, I understand it's a member berry, it's an Easter egg, and yet it felt natural within the story. It wasn't key jangling saying, hey guys, remember Gandalf? It was a moment that fit the story. And that's what I like, is that it's not pumping the brakes to be like, hey everyone, look at Gandalf there. Okay, let's let everything continue on now. The introduction of Gandalf and Saruman to the story at the very end felt natural for everything that had been happening. But again, the reason why I'm a little bit conflicted with this is because I don't like the idea of resurrecting Christopher Lee, and also bringing in Gandalf more as like a wink and a nod as to what kind of adventures are about to happen, especially as Warner Brothers is getting ready to do the hunt for Gollum, which is effectively what the scene was. It was a wink and a nod that the hunt for Gollum is going to happen, that Gandalf is searching for the One Ring, the way to destroy Sauron. I get why it's in there, but I honestly feel like Hera needed a different ending. And this is where I then come to the things that were bad within the movie, because yes, there were some things that weren't great. And here's the very first thing I will say. There is a Mary Sue within this movie. It's not Hera, it's Eowyn. Eowyn is the aging shield maiden who protects Hera throughout the movie. And while I like what they did with the idea of the shield maidens, that there was a band of warrioresses who at the beginning of Rohan's time had banded together after all the men in one of the villages were wiped out, how they banded together to help to protect the flank of Rohan, and that they were even recognized by the king, but eventually weren't necessarily needed anymore because Rohan got stronger, there were now more men to protect the women, and on top of that, that last village was sacked and nearly all of the women there were killed, Eowyn being one of the last survivors. So I like what was done to develop some lore for the idea of the shield maidens, and that is something that could have been played out a whole lot better, especially for the end of the movie. But Eowyn, just the plot bends for her, and that's the problem. All the other characters are so well written, but not Eowyn. Literally, at one point, an army bends around Eowyn so that way she won't be overwhelmed and killed. That's just dumb. I hated seeing that. And whatever Eowyn wants to do, it happens for her. Magically somehow. Everything that Eowyn does succeeds. She's a Mary Sue, and that's annoying. The nice thing is that she's a supporting character, not one of the main characters, so it doesn't overshadow everything else. And Hera's adventure is largely her own, so therefore she's not relying on Eowyn's magical Mary Sue powers to make everything work. And that really does a good credit for Hera. But it's just annoying. This is the fly in the ointment for me because all these other characters were great. I enjoyed it. And Eowyn is fun in her own right. They gave her some good dialogue, but she's a Mary Sue. Let's just be blunt and honest about it. Another thing that I did not like was that ridiculous siege tower. I mean, what the heck is this thing as it rises on up like a great tower and then totters on over onto the wall? That's ridiculous. That's on the same level of dumb as the Ravager from the Rings of Power. It's stupid. It shouldn't have worked. It should have busted the moment that it landed. And I love how dumb it is that there's a drummer on the top to like beat the great song of the enemies attacking Helm's Deep. And then he only realizes at the last second that he's going to die. It's such a waste of a guy. It's such a like laughably bad moment. I did chuckle watching this guy die and watching this tower topple to create a big ramp. Now, here's the thing. The idea of creating a large ramp to overtake a wall is sound military doctrine, especially for that time. And there's some crazy stories, for instance, of how the Romans took on various strongholds by doing these huge ramps. The thing is that they actually built stable ramps that ran up the ground over the wall. In this case, it's this ridiculous wooden tower thing. That's just silly and dumb. I'm not going to defend it. It's a horrible construction piece. They could have done the exact same thing with the ramp, with Hera taking on Wolf either on the dike or on another ramp that's built by the Dunlingdings that's pushed up against the wall, and it would have worked. This construction just doesn't. Another thing that was really dumb is that the writers forgot about the glittering caves and where the passage through the mountains is supposed to be. It's in the back, not on the side. That was silly and dumb, and I know why they made that change. It wasn't them kind of just forgetting. It was a purposeful change in order to facilitate the fact that Hera has to make Wolf distracted. She has to distract him by drawing his attention to the wall when she's dressed up as a bride, so that way everyone else can pass along the mountain and out of the comb unseen. I understand why they created that scene, and it works. The problem is that it goes against the canon in an egregious way, and so that was really silly and stupid. So yeah, don't forget the glittering caves. Remember where the passageway actually is. Don't have that dumb tower, and please do not make Eowyn a Mary Sue. There is one more thing to quickly address that I feel like this wasn't necessarily anything overly bad, but it wouldn't be the way that I would want to end the movie, and I feel like the ending for the movie could have been done a little bit better, and it revolves around what honestly happens with Hera. She rides off with Eowyn into the sunset for many more wild, crazy adventures, and this time to help out Gandalf. Now, the reason why I'm not really a big fan of this is because at the beginning of the movie, we are told to not look for Hera within any of the songs because she isn't there. But she's obviously earned her spot within these songs because she is one of the heroes of Helm's Deep, and she did so in a really fantastic, flashy fashion. Why isn't it that she's remembered? And I think that one of the ways in which they could have really leaned into that and really wrapped things up would be to do one of two things. Number one, and the most logical, would have been to kill Hera off in the battle. That Wolf manages to grievously wound her. It's a mortal wound and she's going to die, and she manages to kill the king of the Dunlingdons before she goes out in a blaze of glory. And that her cousin is like, we shall remember her. And then everyone else like, no, like Helm Hammerhand is the guy that we really remember. He's our king, and you are our king. She is the woman who wore that cursed dress. And that then, because the people are terrified of the dress, because the dress seems to be an omen of death, and yes, she is their princess, but now they've lost the last person of Helm's immediate house, that Freyloft then decides, okay then, we will, within our own household, we will remember and honor this great shield maiden. She is not the last of the Shield Maidens. So long as there are women within Rohan willing to fight for what is right, the legacy of the Shield Maiden shall always go on, and this is then something that's passed down, but she herself is removed from the songs because of the ill omens surrounding her. That is something that is logical within the telling of the story and would fit for Rohan. However, if you want your heroine to survive, there is a second path. And that is that at the end of the movie, as Freylof is talking with his cousin Hera and how she is going to write off, how she's not going to try to take the throne, she's not going to be a presence within the court of Edoras, that she says, look, I am going to go on out there. I do not wish to be remembered really like I thought I did, but I'm not like Hama. I'm not like Haleth. I'm not like my father, and I've fought for Rohan and to protect it, but I can't do that the way I am and the person that I am here from Medusud. I need to go on out there into the world to work with this wizard, Gandalf, who is investigating these rings. I need to go on out there to be an inspiration for other people. This war is bigger than just Rohan. Gondor didn't come to aid simply because we didn't light the beacons, but because other things have been happening as well. My journey isn't yet concluded. I am going to go on out. And so her story, which is then lost to time, is missing. And as far as Freylof and the bards of Rohan go, while they would sing about this warrior princess, who knows what happened to her? Was she claimed by death? We just don't know. And so it's one of those stories that is better left not truly touched. And so it's left to be carried on by the family, by those who truly do wish to figure out what happened to the missing princess. The thing is that that's trying to reconcile what is said at the beginning of the movie, which some people will interpret as a bit of a jab against Tolkien. And yeah, it doesn't quite work all that well, if I'm going to be very honest. And so I would say I would actually remove that element from the beginning of the movie, and then the ending works out just totally fine. But if you're going to keep that opening the way that they have it, with the whole do not look for Hera in these songs, for you will not find her there, it means that the ending needs to be different, and there needs to be a strong explanation for why she isn't found. Because that's missing at the end of the movie, it feels like the ending is incomplete. It's incongruent with the opening. And honestly, I would say that the opening dialogue, the opening monologue, more to say, needs to be altered in order for the ending of this movie to properly fit the way that it does. And so yeah, that's the last thing about this movie where I would honestly say, I just honestly don't like it. I would count that as a mark against the overall story. Those are the big problems within this movie that I readily saw. And there's definitely dialogue throughout the movie that was lifted directly from the Peter Jackson trilogy and then altered just slightly to be put into this movie. That did make me cringe from time to time. And I can see why some people would hear that and immediately say, oh my gosh, no! Oh, it's so lazy writing! It is an example of lazy writing, but again, overall, the story is actually really good, and I would compare a lot of the dialogue in this movie to something like Rings of Power. This movie, even though it's not the best dialogue, runs rings, circles, oceans around the Rings of Power in terms of believable dialogue. And in fact, a lot of the dialogue, especially in the beginning of the movie, is lifted directly from stuff that Tolkien wrote. And so if you're like, this is lazy writing, hey, guess what? Go say that to Tolkien's face, you coward. Now, I guess to quickly address some stuff, because there's going to be those people who say that this movie is awful because it's woke. It's not a woke movie. It's not at all. And I ask you to please define for me what woke is. Now, there are definitely some moments where I can see people be like, oh, that's so woke. Hera doesn't want to marry a man. Is she a lesbian? Is she asexual? Is this part of you pushing your pride upon me? To which I say, please, slow your rolls. Calm down a moment. In fact, actually, as you say that, to anyone who says that, I want you to read some of the stuff that Tolkien wrote, especially, again, the long history of Middle-earth from which this movie borrows plenty of inspiration. There are some great heroes of Gondor who do not take a partner, Boromir being one of them. Boromir would never have gotten married unless his father put a sword to his gut and commanded him to do so. Boromir had no interest in siring children at all. And the last king of Gondor didn't want to marry either. He wanted to go and kill people. And that's one of the reasons why he ultimately was defeated, because the Witch King was like, wait a second, this guy doesn't want to have any kids? Oh, he just wants to fight? Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Before he has the chance to sire any children, I'm going to call him out to battle battle and remind him that his horse was a wimp and cowered before me, therefore he's a coward too. It sounds silly, but it works because the last king of Gondor was an idiot. And goes and gets himself captured by the Witch King and was very likely tortured and then executed. The thing is that there are characters, very big characters, big heroic characters within the Lord of the Rings who don't get married. And I don't care exactly what the sexual orientation for Hera is, because it's never important to the movie. The thing is that she wishes to be wild and free. She doesn't want to be bonded to anyone or anything other than death, which is her freedom. And so it makes sense for Hera. I'm totally okay with that. And then, of course, there's the scene where she kisses Elwyn on the cheek. Oh my, what's happening there? It's a sign of affection. Slow your rolls. For crying out loud, Aragorn kisses Boromir. Frodo kisses Sam. And throughout the books, Sam is constantly kissing Frodo's hand or giving him hugs and the likes. It is actually supposed to be signs of endearment, of close kinship and friendship. And that is what Hera is bestowing upon Elwyn, is that I don't just see you as my servant, I see you as my friend, and as a friend in the darkest of times. And when Hera dismisses Leif to go and lead the people of Rohan out of Helm's Deep, that's not her robbing this pudgy boy of a chance to be a heroic warrior, because it's clear he's not some great warrior like her older brother Haleth or even Hama. No, she gives Leif a chance to survive by doing a great heroic deed, by guiding everyone else away from the scene of battle and thereby rescuing them. It makes Leif a hero, and it shows that Hera has decency to her, that she's not going to throw away the lives of people that she doesn't need to in the defense of her people and her country. And that she then spares the Dunlendings is the right thing to do, because the Dunlendings have every reason to hate the people of Rohan, and the people of Rohan have every reason to hate the Dunlendings. By ensuring that some mercy is shown to them and that Freylof calls off his men, it's a way to try to encourage some healing between the two peoples, which doesn't really work, sadly, until after the events of the Return of the King, where the people of Rohan and the people of Gondor make sure to give real lands to the people of Dunland, and that they then recognize them as the owners of that land and are willing to open up partnership with them, thereby setting aside so much of the animosity between them. And another thing is that, yes, the movie does depict Freylof as probably darker skinned, or at least of darker hair, than he probably would be, because the House of Errol has golden hair, but at the same time, then Hera shouldn't have red hair. What I like is that by showing Freylof and Hera as two very different characters from the rest of the House of Errol, it shows kinship and companionship between them, that they are the outsiders because they think and do differently than the rest of Helm Hammerhand's house and his lords. And it's a great symbolic way to show that. A fiery redhead who wants to be independent, understandable. Freylof as the black sheep of the family, understandable. No, he's not dark. And in fact, actually, you would think that if this movie was woke, that they would try to really dive into how Wolf is just oppressed because he's a half-blood with the blood from Dunland. And while that is mentioned once, because that is something that was rumored of within the books, it never plays front and center, other than that Wolf uses his Dunlanding heritage to summon up those people and rally them around his banner and his cause. Rather than having some great grand critique on racism and on prejudice, that's not there. Instead, these are matters of honor. And if you're paying attention throughout the movie, you can see how the Japanese were drawn to this story, and how they imbued it with many elements of great samurai stories and stories of warlords and stories of honor and those who have thrown honor away. That is all throughout this movie. These are more timeless qualities and stories. This is also something where I see some great intercultural blending of Japanese sensibilities and aesthetics with the British storytelling and ancient European storytelling of Tolkien blended together in wonderful harmony. And there's really no room for any of what people call wokeness in this movie. None at all. A lot of it is very easily explained within the context of The Lord of the Rings. Again, this is why Eowyn is such a fly in the ointment, because she's obviously a Mary Sue and doesn't really belong with all these other really well-written characters with their flaws, foibles, and great qualities that help to redeem them. And so, again, I ask, did we watch the same movie? Because this was a great movie. I enjoyed it. It was amazing. And I want to go see it again. Again, I do claim that aside from the Lord of the Rings trilogy made by Peter Jackson, and by some amazing moments in The Hobbit, this might be one of the best adaptations that we've been given of anything Lord of the Rings related. And I really do mean that. And for anyone who wishes to come against that, then you know what? If you want to, we can have a conversation, not just simply a conversation in the comments. I'm willing to reach out to you and we can even have a live conversation. Because you know what? I think that might actually be really healthy and good for any of us who have differing opinions about this movie. And I think that would be really great to have that conversation going rather than just tearing down this film, because it is well made. It is well written. It's not perfect. It's not the best. I definitely have my contentions with it, as you've heard from me, but I will stand by this as being a good movie, and it gets my 2 thumbs up and my hearty recommendation for anyone to go and see. So with all that being said, I hope that you've enjoyed this review and analysis of War of the Rohirrim, brought to you by Camille's Harem. If you're interested in other great stories, then please check out some of the ones that I have published. Links for them are in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, y'all, tschüss.